The security guard rushed to stop a poor black boy from approaching a wealthy old man. But when the old man grabbed the boy's hand, the crowd gasped at his desperate words. The heavy library doors creaked shut behind Jordan as he stepped out into the golden afternoon light. His worn backpack sagged with the weight of borrowed books, the frayed strap digging into his shoulder through his thin blue t-shirt. The autumn air had grown cooler while he'd been inside reading, and goosebumps rose on his arms. "See you tomorrow, Jordan?" Ms. Parker, the librarian, called through the glass door with a warm smile. "Thanks, Miss Parker." He adjusted the backpack, careful not to damage the precious books inside. The Boston Public Library stood proud behind him, its marble steps descending to Copley Square, where pigeons pecked at forgotten crumbs. Jordan checked his phone. 5:47 p.m. The sun would be setting soon, and he needed to get home before dark. His mom wouldn't be back until late, but his younger siblings would be waiting. That morning scene flashed through his mind as his sneakers hit the concrete sidewalk. The empty refrigerator except for half a gallon of milk and some leftover spaghetti. His little sister Tracy's worn-out shoes with the hole in the toe that Mom promised to replace when she got her next paycheck. His brother Marcus's disappointed face when there wasn't enough cereal for a second bowl. "I'll be home late again tonight, baby," his mom had said that morning, adjusting her cleaning uniform in their cramped bathroom mirror. Dark circles shadowed her eyes from working 2 jobs. "There's spaghetti from last night. Make sure Marcus and Tracy do their homework." "I know, Mom." Jordan had watched her gather her cleaning supplies, her movements slow with exhaustion. "I got it covered." She'd paused then, cupping his face in her work-roughened hands. "You're such a good boy, Jordan. Your daddy would be so proud of the young man you're becoming." The memory of his father sent a familiar ache through his chest. 2 years had passed since the cancer took him. 2 years of watching him waste away because they couldn't afford the treatments he needed. Jordan pushed the thought away as he walked, focusing instead on the stories tucked safely in his backpack. The neighborhood changed as he walked, the buildings growing taller and more elegant. Clean sidewalks replaced cracked concrete. Shiny cars lined the curbs instead of rusty ones. Jordan usually hurried through this part of town, keeping his head down to avoid suspicious looks from doormen and security guards. But today something made him slow his steps. An elderly man stood at the corner of Park Avenue, dressed in an expensive gray suit that probably cost more than 6 months of Jordan's mom's rent. But something was wrong. The man's silver hair was disheveled, and his tie hung loose and crooked. He turned in slow circles, his expression vacant and confused. Jordan stopped walking. The man's Italian leather shoes scraped against the sidewalk as he shuffled uncertainly. A designer watch glinted on his wrist in the fading sunlight. A woman in a business suit walked past him without a glance, focused on her phone. A couple crossed the street to avoid him entirely. The temperature was dropping as the sun sank lower. Jordan watched the old man shiver, his expensive suit offering little protection against the autumn chill. He should keep walking. This wasn't his problem. This was the kind of neighborhood where young black kids like him got stopped by security just for existing. But the old man looked so lost. Jordan's feet remained rooted to the spot as he watched another person hurry past the confused elderly man without stopping. The sun dipped lower behind the tall buildings, casting long shadows across Park Avenue. The old man hugged himself, trembling now. A memory surfaced, his father in the hospital, confused from the pain medication, not recognizing his own family. Jordan had felt so helpless then, watching someone he loved lose themselves piece by piece. He couldn't save his father, but maybe the security guard from the luxury boutique across the street had noticed the situation. He was already moving toward them, his hand resting on his radio, eyes locked on Jordan. Time was running out. Jordan had to make a choice. The old man took an unsteady step toward the busy street, and Jordan's heart jumped into his throat. A taxi horn blared. The security guard was halfway across the street now. The sun slipped lower. Jordan adjusted his backpack, took a deep breath, and made his decision. He moved toward the elderly man just as the first streetlights began to flicker on, casting pools of yellow light onto the darkening sidewalk. The security guard's footsteps echoed behind him. Ahead, the old man swayed dangerously close to the curb. There was no turning back now. The weight of the library books pressed against Jordan's back as he quickened his pace, his mother's voice echoing in his mind. Always do what's right, baby. No matter what anyone thinks. No matter how scared you are. Do what's right. The gap closed between him and the elderly man. 10 feet. 5 feet. 3 feet. The security guard's radio crackled. "Sir?" Jordan called out softly, his heart pounding. "Sir, are you okay?" The old man turned, his pale blue eyes clouded with confusion, and Jordan realized this was only the beginning. Whatever happened next would change everything, for better or worse. The heavy mantle of responsibility settled onto his 13-year-old shoulders as the last rays of sunlight disappeared behind Boston's towering skyline. The elderly man's blue eyes met Jordan's, but there was no recognition, no acknowledgement, just a confused, glassy stare that sent chills down Jordan's spine. It was the same empty look his father had in those final days at Boston Medical Center, when the cancer had spread to his brain and stolen his memories one by one. I should be. The old man's voice trembled, his words trailing off into nothing. His expensive suit jacket hung open, revealing a wrinkled dress shirt with a coffee stain. The winter wind whipped around them, and he shivered violently. The security guard's footsteps grew closer. "Hey, what's going on over there?" Jordan's father's voice echoed in his memory. "Son, this world ain't always going to be fair to you. But don't let it make you hard. Don't let it steal your kindness." "Sir, I just want to help," Jordan said softly, keeping his hands visible. "You look lost." The old man blinked rapidly, his shoulders hunching against the cold. "Lost, yes, This isn't right. None of this is right." A woman in a fur coat hurried past them, her heels clicking on the sidewalk. She clutched her purse tighter as she passed, throwing a suspicious glance their way. Jordan felt his cheeks burn, but kept his focus on the elderly man. "You need to step away from him, kid." The security guard was only a few yards away now, his hand still on his radio. "Now!" Jordan's heart hammered against his ribs. He thought about the morning his father first forgot his name, how the hospital lights had buzzed overhead while his mother tried to hide her tears. They couldn't afford the experimental treatment that might have saved him. Insurance had denied the claim. 3 months later, he was gone. "I can't just leave him," Jordan whispered, more to himself than anyone else. The old man suddenly gripped Jordan's arm. His hand was ice cold. "My house. I need to get home. But the streets, they're all wrong now." "Sir." The security guard's voice grew sharper. "Step away from the boy." A small crowd had begun to gather. Jordan heard their whispers, saw their stares. A teenager pulled out his phone and started recording. Someone muttered something about calling the police. "Please," the old man said, his voice cracking. "Please help me." The sound of a police siren wailed in the distance. Jordan's thoughts raced to his mother, to what she'd say if he got arrested, to Tracy and Marcus waiting at home, to the library books in his backpack that needed to be returned. But then he looked at the old man's face, really looked, and saw past the expensive clothes and white skin. He saw the fear in those pale eyes, the same fear he'd seen in his father's face when the hospital corridors became a maze he couldn't navigate. "What's your name, sir?" Jordan asked, trying to keep his voice steady. The old man's forehead wrinkled with concentration. "Thompson. William Thompson. I should know where I live." Jordan's stomach dropped. Everyone in Boston knew the Thompson name. The family owned half the real estate in the financial district. Their name was on buildings, in the news, and now William Thompson, the patriarch himself, stood lost and shivering on a street corner while people walked past or stopped to stare. "Mr. Thompson," Jordan said carefully, "I want to help you get home. Can you remember anything about your house?" The security guard reached them, his breath heavy from the quick walk. "That's enough. Move along, kid. I'm calling this in." Mr. Thompson's grip on Jordan's arm tightened painfully. No, he's helping me. Don't make him leave." "Sir, this young man was seen approaching you suspiciously." "I'm just doing my job." Jordan felt the familiar weight of prejudice settle on his shoulders. How many times had his mother warned him about this? About being seen as a threat just because of his skin color? "My father died last year," Jordan said suddenly, looking directly at the security guard. "He had Alzheimer's symptoms at the end. I know what it looks like. Mr. Thompson needs help. and I'm not leaving him alone out here. The guard hesitated, his hand still hovering over his radio. The crowd had grown larger. More phones were out, recording the scene. Mr. Thompson swayed on his feet. The gates, he mumbled. Iron gates with lions. My house has iron gates with lions. Jordan's mind raced. He'd passed those gates 100 times on his walks to the library, the massive Thompson estate on Beacon Street. But before he could speak, Mr. Thompson took an unsteady step toward the street again. A car horn blared. Jordan moved without thinking, pulling Mr. Thompson back from the curb. The old man stumbled against him, and Jordan caught his weight, surprising himself with his strength. Jesus Christ, the security guard muttered, finally lowering his hand from the radio. Kid, you better know what you're doing. The police siren grew louder, then faded as it turned down another street. The sun had fully set now, and the temperature was still dropping. Mr. Thompson's trembling had gotten worse. Jordan thought about his father's last lucid moment, how he'd squeezed Jordan's hand and said, "You've got a good heart, son. Don't ever lose that." He thought about his mother working herself to exhaustion because the system had failed them. He thought about how easy it would be to walk away, to let someone else deal with this wealthy old white man's problems, but that wasn't who he was. That wasn't who his parents had raised him to be. "Mr. Thompson," Jordan said firmly, "I know where you live. I can help you get home. Will you trust me?" The old man's clouded eyes focused for a moment, really seeing Jordan for the first time. "Yes," he whispered. "Yes, please." The crowd parted slightly as Jordan began to guide Mr. Thompson away from the curb. The security guard watched them, shaking his head slowly. "Be careful, kid," he called after them. "Both of you." Jordan adjusted his backpack with his free hand, the library books a familiar comfort against his spine. The wind cut through his thin t-shirt as they took their first steps together into the gathering darkness. Whatever came next, there would be no turning back. Behind them, phones continued to record, capturing the unlikely pair, a lost millionaire and a young black boy from the wrong side of town, as they disappeared into the shadows of Boston's elegant streets. The whispers followed them like autumn leaves skittering across the pavement. But Jordan didn't look back. He couldn't. The only way forward was forward, one careful step at a time. "Easy now, Mr. Thompson. Small steps." Jordan supported the elderly man's elbow as they made their way down the sidewalk. The street lamps cast long shadows across their path, and the evening traffic had begun to thin. Mr. Thompson's leather shoes scraped against the concrete. "My wife," he muttered. "She'll be worried. Margaret always worries when I'm late." Jordan's stomach tightened. He'd read about Margaret Thompson's death in the papers last year. Another detail that had slipped away from the old man's failing memory. "We'll get you home soon," Jordan said softly. "Just stay close to me." A group of young professionals walked past, their conversation dropping to whispers as they stared. One woman pulled out her phone and started typing rapidly. Jordan kept his eyes forward, focusing on keeping Mr. Thompson steady. "Boy," Mr. Thompson said suddenly, his voice clearer. "What's your name?" "Jordan, sir." "Jordan Mitchell." "Mitchell." The old man's brow furrowed. "Did I know your father?" "No, sir. You didn't." They passed the window of an upscale restaurant where diners peered out at them, forks paused halfway to their mouths. A waiter in a crisp, white apron pressed his hand to the glass, phone in his other hand. Mr. Thompson's steps faltered. "Something's wrong. The streets, they keep moving." "It's okay," Jordan assured him, though his own heart was racing. "I know these streets. We're heading to Beacon Street." "Beacon Street?" Mr. Thompson's grip tightened on Jordan's arm. Yes, the lions. My house is lions." A police cruiser rolled past slowly, the officer inside watching them intently. Jordan felt sweat break out on his forehead despite the cold. His phone vibrated in his pocket, probably his mom checking on him. He couldn't answer now. "Young man," a sharp voice called out. Jordan turned to see a middle-aged woman in a business suit approaching quickly. "Is everything all right here? Sir, do you need assistance?" Before Jordan could respond, Mr. Thompson drew himself up straighter, a flash of his old authority showing through. "This boy is helping me home. Leave us be." The woman hesitated, her eyes darting between them. "I really think I should call Dash no." Mr. Thompson's voice cracked. No more strangers. Just him. His fingers dug into Jordan's arm almost painfully. Jordan met the woman's suspicious gaze. "Ma'am, I'm taking Mr. Thompson home to his house on Beacon Street. The one with the iron gates and lion statues. He's having a rough evening, but I promise he's safe with me." She pulled out her phone anyway. "I'm going to call the police, just to be safe." "Please," Jordan said, his voice steady despite his fear. He's scared and confused. "More strangers will only make it worse. I know where he lives. I can get him there safely." Mr. Thompson began to tremble again. "Margaret," he called out. "Margaret, where are you?" The woman's finger hovered over her phone. Jordan could feel the moment balancing on a knife's edge. "My father had Alzheimer's," he said quietly. "I know how to help. Please, just let me help him." Something in his voice must have reached her because she slowly lowered her phone. "I'm going to follow you," she said firmly. "Just to make sure." Jordan nodded. "Thank you." They continued down the sidewalk, the woman's heels clicking behind them. Mr. Thompson's steps grew more uncertain as the daylight faded completely. "Cold," he mumbled. "It's so cold." Jordan shrugged off his backpack and struggled to remove his hoodie one-handed while keeping Mr. Thompson steady. The library books thumped against the ground. "Here, sir." He draped the worn sweatshirt over the old man's shoulders. It looked strange over the expensive suit, but Mr. Thompson clutched it gratefully. "Such a good boy," he murmured. "Just like my David when he was young." Jordan picked up his backpack, wondering if David was Mr. Thompson's son. The woman behind them was still typing on her phone, probably documenting everything. They turned on a Commonwealth Avenue, and Mr. Thompson grew agitated again. No, this isn't right. The lions, where are the lions?" "We're not there yet, sir. Just a few more blocks." A small group had begun to trail them at a distance, phones out, whispering to each other. Jordan's shoulders tensed. One wrong move, one misunderstanding, and this could all go terribly wrong. His phone buzzed again. Mom will be getting worried. Tracy and Marcus were probably hungry. But he couldn't stop now. "Jordan?" Mr. Thompson's voice was suddenly small, frightened. I can't remember where I live." "It's okay, Mr. Thompson. I remember. We're almost there." The old man stopped walking, his whole body shaking. "Everything's wrong. The streets, the buildings, nothing's right anymore." Tears began to roll down his lined cheeks. Jordan's chest ached. He'd seen his father break down like this near the end, when the familiar became strange and threatening. "Mr. Thompson," he said gently, turning to face the old man. "Look at me. Just at me." Watery blue eyes met his brown ones. "You're going to be okay. I promise. But you have to trust me. Can you do that?" The woman behind them had stopped typing, watching the exchange with an unreadable expression. Mr. Thompson reached out with a trembling hand and touched Jordan's face. You remind me of someone. Someone kind. Then let that be enough for now. Will you walk with me?" A police siren wailed in the distance. The crowd of onlookers had grown. Phones glowed in the darkness like fireflies. Mr. Thompson lowered his hand and squared his shoulders. "Yes," he said. "Yes, I'll walk with you." They turned north, leaving Commonwealth Avenue behind. Jordan could see Beacon Street ahead, and beyond that, the spires of the Thompson estate rising against the night sky. The woman with the phone was still following, but her face had softened. The crowd hung back, perhaps sensing the gravity of the moment. "Almost there," Jordan murmured, as much to himself as to Mr. Thompson. His thin t-shirt offered little protection against the cold, but the old man needed the hoodie more. Another police car cruised past, this one moving even slower than the last. Jordan kept his movements deliberate and calm, though his heart thundered in his chest. Mr. Thompson began humming softly, an old song that Jordan didn't recognize. For a moment, he sounded almost peaceful. "My father used to sing that song," Jordan said, trying to keep him engaged. "Do you remember what it's called?" The old man's humming stopped. "I know. No, I don't remember." His voice cracked again. "I don't remember so many things now." "That's okay. Some things we carry even when we can't remember them." They were getting closer to Beacon Street. Soon they would see the iron gates with their lion sentinels. Soon this night would end, one way or another. Jordan thought of his father's last days, how even when he couldn't remember their names, he still reached for their hands. Some kinds of love ran deeper than memory. The crowd behind them had grown quiet, perhaps sensing they were witnessing something more profound than a simple walk home. "Just a little further," Jordan said softly. "Just a little further now." The street lights flickered as Jordan and Mr. Thompson approached the intersection. Traffic had thinned, but the eyes watching them seemed to multiply with every block. Jordan's phone buzzed again in his pocket, the fifth time in 20 minutes. "Stop," Mr. Thompson suddenly commanded, his voice sharp with panic. "Stop right here." Jordan froze mid-step. "What's wrong, Mr. Thompson?" "This corner." The old man's eyes darted around wildly. "I used to meet Margaret here every Thursday after her piano lessons. She wore a blue dress and carried sheet music." More tears leaked from his eyes, catching the streetlight. Jordan saw the woman who'd been following them touch her hand to her mouth. "We'd walk to the park," Mr. Thompson continued, lost in the memory. "Buy ice cream from the cart. 50 cents each. But that was a long time ago," Jordan finished gently. Mr. Thompson's grip tightened painfully on Jordan's arm. "Where is she? Why isn't she here?" Jordan's throat tightened. He couldn't tell him the truth, that Margaret Thompson had passed away 14 months ago. The newspapers had run full-page obituaries. "Sir," he said carefully, "let's focus on getting you home. One step at a time." A police cruiser turned onto their street, rolling slowly toward them. Jordan's heart jumped into his throat. The woman who'd been following them stepped forward. "Officers, wait dash," but the cruiser's spotlight had already swung toward them, harsh white light flooding the sidewalk. Jordan squinted against the glare, trying to keep his face neutral despite his rising fear. "Evening," a voice called through the cruiser's speaker. "Everything all right here?" Mr. Thompson began to shake, shrinking away from the light. No, too bright. Like the hospital. Always too bright." "It's okay," Jordan whispered. "Just stay calm." He raised his voice to address the officers. "We're fine, sir. I'm helping Mr. Thompson get home to Beacon Street." The cruiser's doors opened. Two officers stepped out, their hands resting casually near their weapons. "Young man," the first officer said, "step away from the gentleman." Jordan's mouth went dry. This was the moment he'd been dreading. One wrong move, one misunderstanding. But before he could respond, Mr. Thompson surged forward, surprisingly strong in his agitation. "Leave him alone," the old man shouted. "He's the only one who stopped. Everyone else just walked past. Walked past like I was invisible." The officers exchanged glances. The woman who'd been following them stepped into the spotlight. "Officers, I've been walking behind them for 6 blocks, she said. "The boy is telling the truth. He's helping Mr. Thompson get home." "You know this man, ma'am?" the second officer asked. "Everyone in Boston knows William Thompson," she replied. "And right now he clearly needs help." The first officer's posture softened slightly. "Mr. Thompson?" "William Thompson of Thompson Real Estate." Mr. Thompson had begun humming again, clutching Jordan's hoodie around his shoulders. "Yes, sir," Jordan said. "He's having trouble remembering exactly where his house is, but I know the way. It's the mansion on Beacon Street with the iron gates and lion statues." The officers conferred quietly. Jordan's arm was going numb from Mr. Thompson's grip, but he didn't dare move. Finally, the first officer stepped closer. "Would you like us to call Mr. Thompson's family? Or give you both a ride?" Jordan felt Mr. Thompson tense at the word family. "No," the old man said firmly. "No strangers. Just the boy. He reminds me of someone." "Please," Jordan added. "A police car might upset him more." "We're almost there." The second officer nodded slowly. "We'll follow at a distance. Make sure you get there safely." The spotlight clicked off, leaving Jordan blinking at the sudden darkness. His phone buzzed again. "Mom will be frantic by now." "Ready to keep walking, Mr. Thompson?" The old man nodded, his humming fading to silence. They started forward again, the police cruiser crawling behind them at a respectful distance. The woman with the phone fell back, but continued to follow. "My son David," Mr. Thompson said suddenly. "He was kind of like you, always helping people. Is David waiting at home?" Jordan asked carefully. Mr. Thompson's forehead wrinkled. "Home, the lions. We need to find the lions." "Yes, sir. We're getting close." They passed more restaurants, more staring faces pressed against windows. Jordan's thin t-shirt offered no protection against the wind, but he couldn't take his hoodie back from Mr. Thompson. "Tell me about your family," the old man said, his voice clearer than it had been all evening. Jordan swallowed hard. "My mom works 2 jobs. I have a little brother named Marcus and a sister named Tracy. They're probably wondering where I am right now. Your father? He passed away 2 years ago." Mr. Thompson was quiet for a long moment. "I'm sorry," he finally said. "Losing someone, it leaves a hole that never quite." He trailed off, his clarity fading like mist. The police cruiser's engine hummed behind them. Jordan's phone buzzed again. "Margaret," Mr. Thompson whispered. "I need to find Margaret." Jordan blinked back tears. "Let's find your house first, sir. One thing at a time." They turned another corner. Jordan could see Beacon Street ahead, the old mansions rising like shadows against the night sky. Mr. Thompson stopped again, swaying slightly. "I'm tired. So tired." "I know, but we're almost there. See those trees up ahead? Your house is just past them." The old man squinted into the darkness. "Trees." Margaret loved those trees in autumn. All gold and red. A gust of wind cut through the street, and Mr. Thompson shuddered despite wearing Jordan's hoodie. The police officers watched silently from their cruiser. The woman with the phone had finally stopped typing, her face soft with compassion. Jordan thought of his own father. How near the end he'd get so tired just walking from the bed to the bathroom. How sometimes he'd stop in the middle of the hallway, lost in his own home. "Mr. Thompson," he said gently, "tell me more about Margaret. What else did she love?" The old man's eyes lit up for a moment. "Music. She loved music. Played piano every evening after dinner. Chopin was her favorite." They started walking again, slower now. Mr. Thompson's feet dragged with exhaustion. "The lions," he mumbled. "We need to find the lions." "Almost there," Jordan promised. "Almost there." Behind them, the police cruiser's radio crackled softly. Jordan's phone buzzed one more time in his pocket. Ahead, Beacon Street waited in the gathering darkness, and somewhere beyond, 2 iron lions guarded the way home. The night wasn't over yet, but they were getting closer, step by careful step, to whatever waited at the end of this long walk through the dark streets of Boston. Beacon Street stretched before them like a river of shadows and lamplight. Jordan's arm ached from supporting Mr. Thompson, but he didn't dare let go. The police cruiser crept along behind them, its headlights dimmed respectfully. "Something's different," Mr. Thompson muttered, staring at the row of townhouses. "These buildings, they've changed." "The buildings are the same, sir," Jordan said softly. "They've been here for over 100 years." A dog barked somewhere in the distance, making Mr. Thompson jump. His fingers dug deeper into Jordan's arm. No, everything's different now. The colors, the shapes. Nothing stays where it should." Jordan recognized the rising panic in his voice. He'd heard it in his father's voice too many times during those final months. "Mr. Thompson, look at this tree right here." Jordan gestured to a massive oak whose branches stretched over the sidewalk. "Tell me what you see." The old man's breathing steadied slightly as he focused on the tree. "Oak. Old oak. Margaret wanted to build a tree house and one like this for David, but I said no. Too dangerous." His voice cracked. "I should have said yes. Should have given her everything she wanted." Jordan's phone buzzed again. 8 missed calls from Mom now. His stomach churned with guilt. "Your son, David," Jordan said carefully, trying to keep Mr. Thompson talking. "What was he like as a kid, David?" Mr. Thompson's face softened. "Smart boy. Always reading. But kind too. Would give away his lunch money to hungry kids at school." He paused, forehead wrinkling. "Where is David? He should be here." Before Jordan could respond, another police car turned onto Beacon Street, this one moving faster than the cruiser behind them. Mr. Thompson began to tremble again. No more lights. No more strangers." "It's okay," Jordan assured him, though his own heart was racing. "They're just making sure we're safe." The new police car pulled alongside them, and a window rolled down. "Everything all right here? We got some calls about a suspicious situation." The officers from the first cruiser got out and walked up to speak with their colleagues. Jordan could hear them talking in low voices about William Thompson and confusion, and the boy seems to be helping. Mr. Thompson's humming started again, louder this time, as if trying to drown out the world around him. Jordan raised his voice slightly. "Officers, please." The lights and sirens upset him. "We're almost at his house." The first officers vouched for them, and the new police car drove away, though it turned around at the next corner to join the slow procession. "Too many people," Mr. Thompson whispered. "Too many eyes watching." He wasn't wrong. Despite the late hour, people had come out onto their front steps to watch. Phones glowed in the darkness. Jordan heard whispers of Thompson and Alzheimer's and that poor boy. "Just focus on walking, Mr. Thompson. One step at a time." They passed another oak tree, and Mr. Thompson stopped again. "Wait, this tree. I know this tree." Jordan felt a surge of hope. "Yes? What do you remember about it?" "David fell from that branch." Mr. Thompson pointed with a shaking hand. 10 years old. Broke his arm. Margaret was so angry with me for not building that treehouse. Said maybe if he'd had one, he'd have learned to climb properly. His voice was stronger now, the memory momentarily clearing the fog from his mind. "Is that how you know we're getting close?" Jordan asked. "Because of the tree? Close?" Mr. Thompson looked around, confusion clouding his features again. "Close to what?" "Your house, sir, with the iron gates and the lions." "Lions?" The old man's grip tightened convulsively. "Yes, lions. Margaret loved those lions. Said they made her feel safe." They started walking again. Jordan's legs felt like lead, and his thin t-shirt was no match for the cold night air. But Mr. Thompson seemed steadier now, as if the familiar trees were anchoring him to reality. A woman stepped out of one of the townhouses ahead of them. "Mr. Thompson? William Thompson?" The old man shrank against Jordan's side. "No, no more people. Please." The woman took a step back, hands raised. "Of course, I'm sorry. It's just, would you like me to call someone? Your son, perhaps?" "His son, David," Jordan said quietly. "Does he live in Boston?" The woman's face fell. "Oh, you don't know?" "David Thompson passed away 5 years ago. Car accident on the Cape." Jordan felt Mr. Thompson stiffen beside him. For a moment, the old man's face cleared completely, and Jordan saw the full weight of grief crash over him like a wave. "David," he whispered. "My boy. My David." Then the fog rolled back in, and he started humming again, louder than before. Jordan nodded thanks to the woman, who retreated back into her house, wiping her eyes. The police cruisers continued their slow escort. Jordan's phone had stopped buzzing. Either Mom's battery had died, or she was truly panicking now. "Mr. Thompson," Jordan said gently, "tell me more about the lions. What do they look like?" The old man's humming faded. "Bronze. No, iron. Black iron. They sit on pillars, one on each side. Margaret bought them in London. Said every proper English house needed guardian lions." He laughed suddenly, the sound startling in the quiet street. "Cost a fortune to ship them, but she wanted them so—" "And they're still there," Jordan assured him. "Still guarding your house." "My house?" Mr. Thompson looked around wildly. "Where is my house?" "We're getting closer. See how the street curves up ahead? Your house is just around that bend." Another gust of wind cut through them. Jordan's teeth chattered, but he didn't dare ask for his hoodie back. Mr. Thompson needed it more. "You're cold," the old man said suddenly, clarity flickering in his eyes again. "Here, take this back dash now, sir. Please keep it. We're almost there." Mr. Thompson's hand touched Jordan's cheek, his fingers ice cold despite the hoodie. Such a good boy. Like David. Always thinking of others first. The touch reminded Jordan so strongly of his father that tears sprang to his eyes. He blinked them away quickly. "The lions," he said, his voice rough. "Let's focus on finding the lions." They walked on through the pools of lamplight. The police cruisers crawled behind them. Phones continued to record their slow progress. But Jordan noticed the whispers had changed. Less suspicious now, more concerned, even admiring. "Margaret," Mr. Thompson said softly. "Margaret will be worried. She always worries when I'm late." Jordan swallowed hard. "One step at a time, Mr. Thompson. One step at a time." The bend in the road loomed ahead. Beyond it, Jordan knew, stood the Thompson mansion with its iron gates and guardian lions. They were almost there, but as they approached the curve, Mr. Thompson's steps grew more uncertain. "Something's wrong," he mumbled. "Something's missing. Something important." "What's missing, sir?" "I don't." The old man pressed his free hand to his forehead. "I can't. Everything's slipping away again." "Then we'll find it together," Jordan said firmly. "Just like we've found everything else tonight." They turned the corner, and there, in the distance, 2 iron lions gleamed in the lamplight. Almost home, but the night wasn't done with them yet. Not quite. The iron lions emerged from the darkness like sentinels, their black forms silhouetted against the night sky. Jordan felt Mr. Thompson's entire body tense at the sight of them. "No," the old man whispered. "No, that's not right." Jordan's heart sank. "What's not right, Mr. Thompson?" "The lions, they're facing the wrong way." Margaret had them facing east. Always east, toward the sunrise. His voice rose in panic. "These are the wrong lions." The police cruisers had stopped at the corner, their headlights casting long shadows across the sidewalk. Jordan could hear car doors opening, officers stepping out. "Sir," Jordan said carefully, "the lions haven't moved. They've always faced this way." Mr. Thompson pulled away from him suddenly, surprising Jordan with his strength. "You're lying. Everything's wrong. The trees, the street, the lions." He spun in a circle, nearly losing his balance. "Where's Margaret?" "She'll know. Margaret always knows." Jordan reached for him, but Mr. Thompson stumbled backward, Jordan's hoodie slipping from his shoulders to the ground. "Mr. Thompson, please stay back." The old man's voice cracked with fear. "You're all trying to confuse me. Where's my house? Where's Margaret?" The officers started moving toward them. Jordan heard more car doors opening, probably backup arriving. "William," a new voice called out. Jordan turned to see an elderly woman emerge from one of the nearby houses, wearing a bathrobe and slippers. "William Thompson, is that you making all this racket?" Mr. Thompson froze. "Eleanor?" The woman approached slowly. "Yes, it's Eleanor Whitman. I've lived next door to you and Margaret for 30 years. "Margaret," Mr. Thompson said. "Where is she?" "Eleanor. Why can't I find her?" Mrs. Whitman's face softened with sadness. "Oh, William. Margaret's been gone for over a year now. Remember?" The words hit Mr. Thompson like a physical blow. He swayed on his feet, and Jordan rushed forward to steady him. "Gone?" The old man's voice was barely a whisper. "No. No, she can't be gone. We just had breakfast together. She was wearing her blue dress." Jordan felt Mr. Thompson's legs giving out and guided him to sit on a nearby garden wall. The police officers hung back, recognizing the delicacy of the moment. "The lions," Mr. Thompson said, his voice breaking. "She loved those lions. Said they'd keep us safe." He looked up at Jordan with sudden clarity. "But they didn't, did they? They didn't keep her safe." Jordan sat beside him on the wall, his own eyes burning with tears. "No, sir. Sometimes we can't keep the people we love safe, no matter how hard we try." Mrs. Whitman approached slowly. "William, your house is right there, 100 feet away. The boy brought you home." But Mr. Thompson was lost in grief, decades of memories crashing over him at once. David loved those lions too. Used to climb on them, even though Margaret said not to. His face crumpled. "But David's gone too, isn't he? My boy. My David." Jordan's phone buzzed again in his pocket, the first time in nearly an hour. He ignored it. "Mr. Thompson," he said softly, "I know it hurts. When my dad died, it felt like the whole world was wrong. Like everything had shifted just a little bit sideways, and nothing would ever be right again." The old man turned to look at him, really look at him, as if seeing him clearly for the first time. "How do you bear it?" "One day at a time, and we remember them. We keep their love with us, even when they're gone." Mrs. Whitman wiped tears from her eyes. Even the police officers looked moved. Mr. Thompson reached out and gripped Jordan's hand. "You stopped," he said. "Everyone else walked past, but you stopped." "Yes, sir." "Why?" Jordan thought about his father in the hospital, about the nights when pain and confusion had made him a stranger, about the nurses who had shown kindness even when he couldn't remember their names. Because someone once told me that kindness matters more than anything else in this world. That it's the only thing that really lasts. Mr. Thompson nodded slowly. Margaret used to say something like that. And David. His voice caught. David lived it. A car turned onto the street, an expensive black sedan. Jordan heard Mrs. Whitman sigh with relief. "That'll be Robert," she said. "Your other son. I called him when I heard the commotion." The sedan pulled up to the curb, and a man in his 50s jumped out. "Dad!" "Thank God." Mr. Thompson stiffened. "Robert?" "Yes, Dad. It's me." Robert Thompson hurried over, his expensive shoes clicking on the sidewalk. He looked at Jordan with a mixture of confusion and gratitude. "Oh, this boy," Mr. Thompson said, his grip tightening on Jordan's hand. "He brought me home. When I was lost, he brought me home." Robert's face softened. "Thank you. We've been trying to get Dad to accept a caregiver, but he keeps insisting he's fine on his own." "I am fine," Mr. Thompson snapped, a flash of his old self showing through. Then his voice softened. "But maybe not as fine as I thought." Jordan stood up slowly, his legs stiff from the long walk. He picked up his hoodie from where it had fallen and draped it back over Mr. Thompson's shoulders. "Keep it, sir," he said when the old man tried to protest. "At least until you get inside." Robert was typing on his phone. "I'll have my driver take you home." "Where do you live?" But before Jordan could answer, Mr. Thompson spoke up. "No more strangers tonight. Let the boy walk home. Let him walk and think and remember." He looked up at Jordan. "That's what you do, isn't it? Walk and think and remember." Jordan nodded, his throat tight. The police officers conferred briefly, then approached. "We'll escort him home," one said. "Make sure he gets there safely." Robert Thompson pulled out his wallet, but Jordan stepped back. "No, sir. Please. I didn't do this for money." Mr. Thompson smiled, his first real smile of the night. No, you didn't. Just like David wouldn't have." He squeezed Jordan's hand one last time. "Thank you, son, for bringing me home, for helping me remember." Jordan watched as Robert and Mrs. Whitman helped Mr. Thompson to his feet. The old man walked through the iron gates, past the guardian lions, stopping once to look back. "The lions," he said softly. "They were always facing east, weren't they?" "Yes, Dad," Robert said gently. "They still are." Jordan turned away as they went inside, not wanting them to see his tears. One of the police officers touched his shoulder. "Ready to go home, son? Your mom's probably worried sick." Jordan nodded, pulling out his phone to see 12 missed calls. As they walked back the way they'd come, he glanced over his shoulder one last time. The iron lions stood guard in the lamplight, facing east, waiting for a sunrise that would bring another day, another set of memories to hold or lose or find again. And somewhere in the big house beyond them, an old man sat with his son, wearing a borrowed hoodie, remembering what it meant to be lost and found again by an unexpected act of kindness. The police cruiser's headlights cut through the darkness as Jordan directed them toward his neighborhood. His phone had finally died, the screen going black mid-call, when his mom tried for the 13th time. "Left here," he told the officer driving. "Then 3 blocks down." "That was a good thing you did back there," the officer said, glancing at him in the rearview mirror. "Not many people would have stopped." Jordan stared out the window at the passing streets. The neighborhoods grew more familiar, more worn. Broken sidewalks replaced smooth concrete. Security bars appeared on windows. "My dad had Alzheimer's," he said quietly. "I know what it looks like when someone's lost like that." The second officer, riding in the passenger seat, turned to look at him. "William Thompson. Man's worth millions, but money can't buy your way out of some things, can it?" Jordan thought about his father's hospital bills, about the experimental treatments they couldn't afford. "No, sir. It can't." They turned onto his street. The apartment buildings rose dark and tired against the night sky. A group of teenagers scattered from the corner as the police car approached. "That one," Jordan pointed, "with the blue door." The cruiser had barely stopped when the building's front door burst open. Jordan's mother ran out, still wearing her cleaning uniform from her second job. "Jordan," she reached the car just as he stepped out. "Baby, where have you been?" "I've been calling and calling Dash." She pulled him into a fierce hug, then pushed him back to examine him. "Are you hurt? Did something happen? Why are you with the police?" The officers got out of the car. "Ma'am," the first one said, "your son's not in any trouble. In fact, he just helped a confused elderly gentleman get home safely. Spent the last 2 hours making sure Mr. Thompson made it back to his family." His mother's face shifted from worry to confusion. "Mr. Thompson? William Thompson? The real estate developer?" "Yes, ma'am. Your son found him wandering confused on Park Avenue. Could have walked past like everyone else did. Instead, he took the time to help." Jordan felt his mother's hands tighten on his shoulders. Through the open apartment door, he could see Tracy and Marcus peering out, their eyes wide. "Come inside," his mother said to the officers. "Please, let me at least make you some coffee." The officers exchanged glances. "Thank you, ma'am, but we should get back to our patrol. We just wanted to make sure Jordan got home safely." His mother nodded, then looked at Jordan. "Where's your hoodie?" "I gave it to Mr. Thompson. He was cold." Something flickered across his mother's face. Pride mixed with a deeper emotion Jordan couldn't quite read. The officers returned to their cruiser, but before they drove away, the second one rolled down his window. "Jordan," he called, "what you did tonight? That's what real character looks like. Your parents raised you right." Jordan felt his mother's arm tighten around him as they watched the police car disappear around the corner. Then she turned him to face her. "Inside," she said firmly. "Right now. You got some explaining to do." Tracy and Marcus scrambled back as they entered the small apartment. The kitchen light buzzed overhead, casting harsh shadows on the worn linoleum floor. "Jordan," Tracy launched herself at him. "We thought something bad happened." "Yeah," Marcus added, trying to sound tough despite his obvious relief. "Mom was about to call hospitals and stuff." "Sit," their mother commanded, pointing to the kitchen table. "All of you." Jordan started talking. So he did. He told them about leaving the library, about seeing Mr. Thompson lost and confused on Park Avenue, about the security guard and the gathering crowd, about the long walk to Beacon Street with the police escort, about Mrs. Whitman and Robert Thompson and the Iron Lions facing east. His mother listened without interrupting, her hands clasped tight on the table. Tracy and Marcus sat spellbound, their eyes huge. When he finished, the kitchen was quiet except for the humming fluorescent light and the distant sound of sirens somewhere in the city. "You could have been hurt," his mother finally said, "or arrested. All those people assuming the worst, seeing a young black boy with a confused white man." "I know, Mom, but I kept thinking about Dad, about those last months when he'd get confused and scared, how sometimes strangers would just walk past him like he wasn't even there." His mother's hands unclenched slowly. She reached across the table and took his face between her palms, just like she had that morning. "You've got your father's heart," she whispered. "God help me, but you do." Tracy tugged at Jordan's sleeve. "Did you really see inside the Thompson mansion? Was it fancy?" "No," Jordan said. "I just got him to the gate. To the lions." "Lions?" Marcus perked up. "Real lions?" "Iron ones." His wife Margaret had them shipped from London because she said every proper English house needed guardian lions. His mother stood up suddenly, wiping her eyes. "All right, all of you, bed. It's way past midnight, and you've got school tomorrow." But Mom Tracy started to protest. "Bed. Now. Jordan, you too. You must be exhausted." Jordan was. His legs felt like lead, and his arms ached from supporting Mr. Thompson's weight. But as he stood up, his mother caught his arm. "You did good, baby," she said softly. "Your daddy would be so proud. But please, please don't ever scare me like that again. Call next time. Let me know where you are." "Yes, ma'am. I'm sorry about my phone dying." She pulled him into another hug, and for a moment, Jordan let himself lean into her strength, breathing in the familiar mix of cleaning products and her coconut hair oil. "Get some sleep," she said. "Tomorrow's another day." In his small bedroom, Marcus was already snoring in the bottom bunk. Jordan climbed to the top bed, still wearing his jeans and t-shirt, too tired to change. Through the thin walls, he could hear his mother moving around the kitchen, probably getting ready for her early morning shift. Tracy was whispering to herself in the next room, probably still excited about the Iron Lions. Jordan closed his eyes. In his mind, he saw Mr. Thompson sitting in his massive house, wearing a borrowed hoodie from the wrong side of town. He saw the old man's face when he remembered his wife and son were gone. He saw the iron lion standing guard, facing east, waiting for the sunrise. His last thought before sleep took him was of his father. Not the confused, sick man from the hospital, but the strong, kind father who had taught him that some things matter more than money or status or what other people might think. The father who would have stopped to help a lost old man find his way home. The clock on his phone had stopped at 11:47 p.m. when the battery died. In a few hours, the sun would rise over Boston's Beacon Street, and everything would change. Jordan woke to the sound of someone pounding on their apartment door. Sunlight streamed through the cracked window, and his entire body ached from the previous night's long walk. "Coming!" His mother's voice carried from the kitchen. Jordan heard her footsteps, then the creak of the door opening. "Mrs. Mitchell?" A man's voice. Familiar somehow. "I'm Robert Thompson. We need to talk about your son." Jordan sat up so quickly he banged his head on the ceiling. Below him, Marcus stirred in the bottom bunk. "What's happening?" his brother mumbled. "Nothing. Go back to sleep." But Marcus was already climbing out of bed, and Jordan could hear Tracy's door opening too. He jumped down from the top bunk, still wearing yesterday's clothes, and hurried to the kitchen. Robert Thompson stood in their small living room, looking out of place in his tailored suit. Two other men in dark suits waited by the door. Jordan's mother sat rigid on their worn couch, her hands clasped in her lap. "Jordan," Robert said, turning to face him. "Good morning, sir." Jordan glanced at his mother, trying to read her expression. Is your father okay?" Robert's face softened. "He's fine. Better than fine, actually. He slept through the night for the first time in months. Still wearing your hoodie, by the way. Refuses to take it off." Tracy appeared in her doorway, eyes wide. Marcus peeked around Jordan's shoulder. "Mrs. Mitchell," Robert continued, "what your son did last night. I've been trying to get my father to accept help for months, to acknowledge that he can't live alone anymore. But he's proud, stubborn, didn't want to admit he was struggling. Like someone else I knew," Jordan's mother said quietly. "Last night changed something. Seeing himself through Jordan's eyes, experiencing that kindness from a stranger." Robert paused, collecting himself. He agreed this morning to move into assisted living. Somewhere safe, with people who can help him when he gets confused. Jordan felt his mother's hand on his shoulder, squeezing gently. "That's good," he said. "I'm glad he'll be taken care of." "Yes." Robert gestured to one of the men by the door, who stepped forward with a leather briefcase. "But that's not why I'm here." The man opened the briefcase and removed a thick envelope, handing it to Robert. "Jordan's kindness last night, it reminded my father of my brother David, of the person David was, the way he'd always stop to help others regardless of who they were or what they looked like." Robert cleared his throat. Dad spent most of the night talking about David, about Margaret, about regrets and second chances. This morning, he insisted on making some changes to his estate planning. He held out the envelope to Jordan's mother, who didn't move to take it. "What is this?" she asked, her voice cautious. "A trust fund. For Jordan's education. And for your other children as well." Robert smiled at Tracy and Marcus, who were watching with wide eyes. $5 million to be administered by our family foundation. Full college tuition for all 3 children, plus living expenses and graduate school, if they choose that path. The remainder will be held in trust until they turn 25. The kitchen light buzzed overhead. A car horn blared on the street below. Jordan felt his mother's hand trembling on his shoulder. "We can't accept Dash," she started. "Please," Robert interrupted. "My father insists. He said it's what Margaret would have wanted. What David would have done." He turned to Jordan. "You didn't just help my father find his way home last night. You helped him find his way back to himself, to his memories of the people he's lost. That's worth more than money can measure." Jordan thought about Mr. Thompson's face when he remembered his wife and son were gone. About the way he'd gripped Jordan's hand and said, "You stopped. Everyone else walked past, but you stopped." His mother stood slowly. "My son didn't help your father for a reward." "I know," Robert said. "That's exactly why Dad wants to do this. Because Jordan helped without expecting anything in return. Just like David would have." He held out the envelope again. This time, Jordan's mother took it. "The foundation will contact you to set up the accounts. Robert said. Everything's arranged. The money will be there for their education, no matter what. Tracy tugged at Jordan's sleeve. Does this mean I can go to art school? Baby, their mother said softly. This means you can go anywhere you want. Robert smiled. Dad also insisted on returning this. He nodded to the other man by the door, who stepped forward holding Jordan's hoodie, now cleaned and pressed. He said to tell you thank you. For the hoodie, and for everything else? Jordan took the sweatshirt, the familiar worn fabric soft in his hands. It smelled like expensive laundry detergent now. Will you tell him? Jordan paused, gathering his thoughts. Tell him the lions are exactly where they should be. Facing east, waiting for the sunrise. Tell him Margaret was right about that. Robert's eyes glistened. I will. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a business card. And if you ever need anything at all, call me. You're part of our family story now, Jordan. That means something to us. After Robert and his men left, the apartment was silent except for the buzzing kitchen light. Jordan's mother stood holding the envelope, her hands shaking slightly. Mom? Marcus asked. Are we rich now? She laughed, a sound caught between joy and tears. No, baby. But you've got a future now. All of you. A chance to be whatever you want to be. Tracy was bouncing on her toes. Can I take real art classes? With proper paints and everything? We'll see. Their mother set the envelope carefully on the kitchen table. Right now, all of you need to get ready for school. But Mom Dash, all three children started to protest. No buts. Education is what got us this blessing, and education is still the priority. Move it. As Tracy and Marcus rushed to get dressed, Jordan lingered in the kitchen. His mother picked up the envelope again, running her fingers over the thick paper. Mom, he said softly, are you okay? She turned to him, and the tears in her eyes finally spilled over. Your daddy used to say everything happens for a reason. That God puts us where we need to be, when we need to be there. She touched his face gently. Last night, you were exactly where you needed to be, doing exactly what your father taught you to do. Jordan hugged her tight, breathing in her familiar scent. Through the window, he could see the morning sun climbing higher over the city, painting the brick buildings in shades of gold. Somewhere across town, two iron lions stood guard on Beacon Street, their shadows stretching west as they faced the rising sun. And in a mansion behind them, an old man sat remembering, not just the people he'd lost, but the kindness that had brought him home. Jordan pulled back from the hug and picked up his hoodie from the table. It felt different somehow, not just because of the expensive cleaning, but because of everything it represented. Everything that had changed in a single night. Go get ready for school, his mother said, wiping her eyes. The future's waiting. Jordan nodded and headed back to his room, the hoodie soft in his hands, his mind full of iron lions and lost old men and the strange ways that kindness could change not just one life, but many. The Boston Public Library stood quiet in the afternoon sun. Jordan sat on the marble steps, his restored hoodie warm against the autumn chill, watching people hurry past on Copley Square. You're early today, Ms. Parker said, stepping out through the heavy doors. No studying inside? Just thinking? Jordan looked up at the librarian who'd been lending him books for the past 2 years. A lot happened yesterday. She sat down beside him, smoothing her skirt. I saw the video on the news this morning. You and Mr. Thompson. Pretty brave thing you did. Jordan shrugged. I just helped someone who was lost. Sometimes that's the bravest thing we can do. She smiled. Your father would be proud. His phone buzzed, a text from his mother. The screen was cracked, but he could read the message. Meeting with the foundation at 4. Don't be late. Ms. Parker, Jordan said slowly. Did you ever meet my dad? When he used to pick me up here? A few times. She adjusted her glasses. He always said the library was your special place. That books would take you places he couldn't. Jordan remembered those afternoons, before his father got sick. How they'd sit on these same steps, sharing a sandwich, his father asking about everything Jordan had read that day. I have something to show you, Miss Parker said, reaching into her bag. She pulled out a newspaper, the Boston Globe. On the front page was a photo of Jordan and Mr. Thompson walking past the Iron Lions. The headline read, Act of Kindness Changes Lives. Local teen helps lost millionaire find his way home. They interviewed your mother this morning, Ms. Parker said. and Robert Thompson, even the police officers who followed you. But you know what everyone kept saying? Jordan shook his head, that you didn't do it for recognition or reward. You did it because it was right. She touched his shoulder gently, just like your father would have done. His phone buzzed again. Another text from Mom. Tracy's already at the foundation office. Says the art supplies they showed her are totally awesome. Get moving. Jordan smiled, picturing his sister's excitement. Since Robert Thompson's visit that morning, she talked about nothing but art school and painting classes. Things are going to change now, he said quietly. With the trust fund and everything, some things will change, Ms. Parker agreed. But not the important things. Not who you are. A familiar black sedan pulled up to the curb. The driver stepped out, one of the men who'd been with Robert Thompson that morning. Mr. Mitchell, the driver called. Mr. Thompson asked me to ensure you arrive at the foundation meeting on time. Jordan stood, shouldering his backpack. The library books inside were due today, the ones he'd been carrying when he first saw Mr. Thompson lost on Park Avenue. Go on, Ms. Parker said, standing too. Your future's waiting. But before he walked down the steps, Jordan turned to her. I'll still come here. To read. To think. This place, it matters. She smiled. I know you will. Some things don't change, even when everything else does. The ride to the Thompson Foundation offices was quiet. Jordan watched the city scroll past the tinted windows, remembering his walk with Mr. Thompson along these same streets just hours ago. The car pulled up to a gleaming office building downtown. Through the glass doors, Jordan could see his mother and siblings in the lobby, dressed in their best clothes. There you are. Tracy grabbed his arm as soon as he walked in. You have to see the art studio they have upstairs. Real easels and everything. Marcus was more subdued, but his eyes shone with excitement. They said I could take computer programming classes, like real ones with actual computers. Their mother smoothed Jordan's hoodie. Robert's waiting upstairs. They want to discuss the trust fund details and educational opportunities. She paused, studying his face. You okay, baby? Jordan nodded, just thinking about Dad, about what he'd say if he could see all this. She hugged him tight. He sees it. Trust me, he sees it. The elevator ride to the foundation offices was swift and smooth. Robert Thompson met them at the doors, shaking Jordan's hand firmly. Dad's asking about you, he said. He's settling into the assisted living facility today. Wants to know if you'll visit sometime. I'd like that, Jordan said. How are the Lions? Robert smiled, still facing east. Dad made me check this morning. Said we can't ever change that. It's what Margaret wanted. They spent the next hour in a conference room with lawyers and financial advisors, discussing trusts and investments and educational opportunities. Jordan watched his mother take careful notes, asking smart questions about everything. Finally, Robert handed each of them an envelope. Your official welcome to the Thompson Foundation family, he said. We'll help guide you through every step of your educational journey. Tracy opened hers immediately, gasping at the art school brochures inside. Marcus studied the computer science program descriptions with intense focus. Jordan's envelope contained something extra, a handwritten note from Mr. Thompson. Dear Jordan, last night, you didn't just help an old man find his way home. You helped him find his way back to himself, to his memories of Margaret and David, and to the person he wants to be. Margaret always said that kindness was the only thing that truly lasts. David lived that truth every day of his life. Last night, you proved them both right. The Lions still face east, waiting for the sunrise. And I'm still wearing your hoodie as I write this. Some things we keep, not because we need them, but because they remind us of what matters most. Thank you for stopping when others walked past. William Thompson. Jordan folded the note carefully and slipped it into his pocket, next to his library card. One more thing, Robert said, handing Jordan another envelope. Dad insisted. Inside was a photograph, old and slightly faded. It showed a young man kneeling beside the iron lions, his arm around a little boy who was trying to climb onto one of the stone bases. That's David and his son, Robert said softly. Dad said you should have it. Said you reminded him of David more than anyone has in years. Later, as they left the foundation offices, Jordan's mother pulled him aside in the lobby. Your father used to say that we're all connected, she said. that helping others isn't just the right thing to do. It's the only thing that makes life worth living. She touched his face gently. He'd be so proud of the man you're becoming. Outside, the autumn sun was setting over Boston, painting the sky in shades of gold and purple. Jordan pulled on his hoodie, the one that had traveled across the city and back from one world to another. Tracy was already talking about art classes. Marcus was reading one of the computer programming brochures. Their mother walked beside them, her head held high, her steps lighter than Jordan had seen in years. Tomorrow he would go back to the library, back to his books and dreams, but something had changed, not just in their circumstances, but in the way he saw the world. Sometimes the biggest journeys start with a single choice, a moment when we decide to stop instead of walk past, to help instead of turn away. His phone buzzed one last time. A text from an unknown number. The lines say hello. W.D. Jordan smiled and looked east toward Beacon Street, where two iron guardians stood watching the sky fade from day to night, waiting for another sunrise. Some things change everything, and some things never change at all. That night, in their small apartment, Jordan hung the photograph of David Thompson and his son on the wall beside his bed. In the dim light, the iron lions seemed to glow with a warm, familiar light. Outside their window, the city hummed with life and possibility. And somewhere across town, an old man sat in a comfortable chair, wearing a borrowed hoodie, remembering what it meant to be lost and found again. The future stretched out before them all, bright with promise and possibility. But more importantly, they carried with them the truth that Jordan's father had taught him, that Mr. Thompson had remembered, and that David had lived, that in the end, kindness is the only thing that truly lasts.